They say the king was born during a storm like no other. The skies wept with fire, and the winds howled like spirits mourning a loss. The midwife who delivered him, Mama Ofune, swore that the air grew colder the moment he drew his first breath. His mother, Queen Obianuju, had been in labor for 3 days, her cries echoing through the palace halls. By the time the boy arrived, her body was limp and her spirit had fled. The child came into the world silent, his eyes wide open, unblinking. His father, King Obidike, named him Ifekauche, which means the will of the gods. But not everyone believed the name fit. Mama Ofune, who had lived long enough to know the ways of spirits and men, refused to bless the child. "This one is marked," she said, her voice trembling. "He carries a shadow in his heart." The king dismissed her words, banishing her from the palace for speaking against his son. "My child is no curse," he declared. "He is a gift from the gods." But the elders whispered among themselves, for they too had seen the signs. The boy grew quickly, too quickly. By his 5th year, he could wrestle boys twice his age, his strength unnatural for someone so small. He rarely laughed or cried, and his eyes seemed to pierce through people as if he could see their thoughts. Animals feared him. Dogs would whimper and slink away, and even the village's most stubborn goats refused to cross his path. Birds avoided the palace grounds, their songs silenced whenever he stepped outside. But the most unsettling thing was his shadow. It moved when he didn't. One evening, as the boy sat by the palace gates, a servant swore he saw the shadow stretch out on its own, curling like smoke around the boy's feet. The servant told no one but his wife, and the next morning he was found dead, his body twisted unnaturally. The villagers began to murmur. Some said the boy was not human, that he had been sent by the gods as a punishment for some unknown sin. Others said he was a spirit in disguise, a being too powerful for the mortal world. When the boy turned 10, the elders performed a divination to understand his destiny. The ceremony took place in the sacred grove, far from prying eyes. The boy sat in the center of a circle, surrounded by the most powerful rainmakers and diviners in the land. They chanted and cast their cowrie shells, their faces pale as the pieces fell into place. The eldest rainmaker, Baba Ekene, spoke first, his voice heavy with dread. "This child will not serve the gods," he said. "He will rise against them." The elders gasped, but Baba Ekene wasn't finished. He will challenge their power, tear down their shrines, and cast their names into the void. His hatred will know no bounds, and his shadow will consume all who stand in his way. The diviners begged King Obidike to rid himself of the boy, to cast him out or offer him as a sacrifice to appease the gods. But the king was furious. "You dare to speak against my son?" he roared. "He is my heir, my blood. No harm will come to him while I live." But the diviners warned him, saying, "If you do not act, the gods will." Strange things began happening in the years that followed. The palace walls cracked without reason, and crops failed no matter how many sacrifices were made. Servants claimed to hear whispers in the night, voices that seemed to come from the boy's chambers. The boy himself grew more distant, spending hours alone in the forest. When his father asked him what he did there, he simply said, "I listen." To what? To those who came before. By the time the boy was crowned king, the omens were undeniable. The day of his coronation, a great tree in the palace courtyard split in two, its branches crashing to the ground. The sky darkened, though there were no clouds, and the villagers swore they heard a voice in the wind. "He will bring ruin," it whispered. The king dismissed it all as coincidence, determined to prove his strength. He vowed to build a kingdom unlike any other, one that would stand above all others. But as the years passed, his defiance grew. The first shrine he tore down was to Amadioha, the god of thunder. The priests begged him to reconsider, but he mocked their warnings. "If Amadioha is so powerful, let him strike me down," he said. The sky remained clear, but the earth beneath the shrine cracked, swallowing its foundation whole. The king laughed, claiming it was proof of his superiority. But the villagers began to fear him, saying he had angered forces too great for any man to withstand. The revelation came years later, when the king ventured deep into the forest. He had heard rumors of a hidden altar, once said to belong to the gods themselves. Determined to claim it, he entered the forest alone, armed with nothing but his pride. Days passed, and when he returned, his eyes were no longer his own. "They spoke to me," he said, his voice hollow. "They showed me the truth." When asked what he had seen, he only smiled. "The gods are nothing," he said, "and I am everything." From that day, the king was no longer a man, but something else, something ancient and eternal. The villagers whispered that the gods had cursed him, but others said he had cursed himself, his hatred transforming him into a shadow of his former self. His reign was marked by fear, destruction, and a darkness that refused to be named. And though he claimed to hate the gods, some believed he had become one, a god of shadows, born not of divinity, but of defiance. Building on the climactic divine reckoning and the restoration of peace to the village, the king's hatred for the divine knew no bounds, but his ultimate act of defiance came on the day he spat on the Bible. It was a gathering day, the village square filled with frightened faces. The king had summoned everyone, his voice booming as he declared that he would once and for all prove that no god, spirit, or ancestor held power over him. "I will show you all," he sneered. "Your gods are as weak as your faith." He walked to the edge of the square, where the village's only Bible lay on a stool. It belonged to the late Pastor Namdi, who had died trying to protect it when the king's men stormed the church years ago. The villagers had hidden it ever since, fearing the king would destroy it if he found it. But somehow, he had. With the Bible in hand, he held it aloft for all to see. "This book," he said, his voice dripping with scorn, "is nothing but lies." He spat on its cover, the glob of spit glistening in the harsh sunlight. The crowd gasped, some covering their faces, others falling to their knees in prayer. Even those who had lost their faith felt the weight of his actions, the sheer audacity of it. But the king wasn't done. He opened the Bible, tearing out pages and tossing them into the air like confetti. "If your God is real, let him strike me down now," he shouted, his laughter echoing through the square. And then the sky answered. At first, it was a rumble, distant but growing, like the voice of something ancient waking from a long slumber. The air grew heavy, and the ground beneath the villagers' feet trembled. The king's laughter faltered as the clouds darkened, swirling above the square. "What is this?" he muttered, looking up. The villagers began to scatter, screaming and running for cover, but the king stood rooted to the spot, his pride refusing to let him show fear. Then it came, a blinding flash of light that split the sky in two, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. The lightning struck the king where he stood. The force threw him to the ground, his body convulsing as the energy coursed through him. The Bible fell from his hands, untouched by the flames that began to consume him. The shadows that had clung to him for years writhed and screamed, their forms dissolving into the air like smoke. For a moment, the village was silent, save for the crackling of the flames. Then the clouds parted, and the sun shone through. brighter than it had in years. The villagers emerged slowly, their eyes wide with disbelief. The king's body lay in the center of the square, charred and lifeless, the ground around him scorched. With the king's death, the air felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. The river, which had been black and foul for years, began to clear. By the next morning, its waters ran clean and sweet, and fish returned in abundance. The crops, long withered and barren, began to sprout green shoots, seemingly overnight. The village elders gathered to pray, thanking God for delivering them from the darkness. "We were blind," Baba Ekene said, tears streaming down his face, "but now we see. Faith is not in defying the gods, but in honoring them." The villagers rebuilt the shrines and restored the church. For the first time in years, they sang songs of hope and joy. Even the forest seemed to forgive them. The hunters reported seeing animals return in numbers they hadn't seen since before the king's reign. The land, once cursed, was alive again. The story of the king who hated God became a cautionary tale, told around fires and at gatherings. Parents warned their children about the dangers of pride and defiance, reminding them of the lightning that struck down a man who dared to challenge the divine. The Bible he spat on was placed in the church, its torn pages mended with care. It became a symbol of resilience and a reminder of the power of faith. Many years later, an old man who had been a child during the king's reign spoke of the event to his grandchildren. "I was there," he said, his voice trembling with age. "I saw the shadows flee and the lightning strike. It was as if God himself had come to remind us of his power." The children listened wide-eyed, the flames of the hearth casting long shadows on their faces. "Never forget," the old man said, "that pride can destroy, but faith can rebuild." And so, peace reigned in the village, a peace hard-earned and deeply cherished. The king's name faded from memory, but the lesson of his downfall remained. After the death of the king who hated God, the village elders convened to decide who would take the throne. Tradition dictated that the crown should pass to the king's closest blood relative, but his lineage had been shrouded in mystery. Some whispered that his hatred of God had severed his family ties, leaving no one behind. The elders prayed for guidance, fasting for 3 days and nights in the sacred grove. On the 4th day, Baba Ekene emerged with a revelation. "The new king will not come from bloodlines," he announced. "He will come from faith." The elders searched the village for a man of unwavering faith, someone whose character had remained untainted during the dark years of the previous king's reign. Their choice fell on Obiora, a humble farmer known for his kindness and devotion to God. Obiora had never sought power. He spent his days tending to his fields and his nights in prayer, often singing hymns that drifted through the village, a comforting reminder of a time before the shadows. When the elders approached him, he was reluctant. "I am not worthy to lead," he said, kneeling before them. But Baba Ekene placed a hand on his shoulder. "It is not worthiness that God seeks," he said. "It is willingness." Obiora's coronation was simple, a stark contrast to the lavish celebrations of the past. Instead of feasts and dances, the villagers gathered in the church, where Obiora knelt before the altar, offering his crown to God before placing it on his head. "As your king," he said, his voice steady, "I will serve not just you, but him who created us all." His first act as king was to rebuild the village spiritually. He invited pastors, priests, and elders from neighboring communities to teach the villagers about God's love and mercy. "We were lost," he told his people, "but now we are found. Let us walk together in faith." Under Obiora's rule, the church became the heart of the village. Services were held every Sunday, and the church bells, silent for so long, rang out once again, their sound carrying across the fields and forests. The shrines to the ancestors were also restored, but this time they were places of remembrance and respect, not fear. Obiora taught the villagers that honoring their ancestors did not mean worshipping them, but recognizing their sacrifices and learning from their wisdom. The villagers, once divided and fearful, began to unite. Families prayed together, neighbors shared meals, and the laughter of children returned to the streets. Obiora believed that faith was not just about words, but actions. He led efforts to restore the village's farmlands, organizing communal workdays where everyone, including the king himself, labored side by side. He also established a council of elders and villagers to make decisions together, ensuring that no one felt unheard or forgotten. The blessings that followed were undeniable. The rains came at the right times, the harvests were bountiful, and the rivers teemed with fish. The villagers attributed these blessings to their renewed faith and unity. Though the village flourished, the memory of the former king lingered like a shadow. Some villagers struggled to reconcile the horrors they had endured with the peace they now enjoyed. Obiora addressed this during a gathering in the square. "We cannot erase the past," he said, "but we can learn from it. Let us forgive, not to excuse what was done, but to free ourselves from the chains of bitterness." The villagers wept as they prayed together, releasing years of pain and anger. To ensure the village never forgot its lessons, Obiora established an annual day of thanksgiving. On this day, the villagers gathered at the square, bringing offerings of food, crafts, and songs to celebrate their blessings and renew their commitment to God. The Bible that the former king had defiled was placed in a glass case in the church, a symbol of resilience and redemption. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Even in darkness, light prevails." Under Obiora's rule, the village became known throughout the region as a place of peace and prosperity. Travelers who passed through spoke of its kindness and hospitality, its people quick to share their blessings with others. Obiora ruled for many years, his leadership marked by humility and grace. When he grew old, he called his children and the village elders to his side. "Remember," he said, "a king's power is not in his crown, but in his service. Lead with faith, and this village will never fall into darkness again." Years passed, and the village, under Obiora's guidance and the wisdom passed down to future leaders, became a thriving community. Its fertile lands yielded abundant harvests, and its rivers sparkled with life. The once scorned village became a haven for travelers seeking peace and spiritual renewal. Children played freely in the streets, singing songs of faith and joy, their laughter a testament to how far the community had come. Schools were built, and education became a priority. Obiora's belief that knowledge and faith could coexist brought progress and enlightenment to the village. The king's family grows. Obiora, though a humble man, was blessed with a loving family. His wife Adaora was as devout as he, supporting him in every decision and ensuring that the village's children, especially orphans, were cared for. Together, they had 3 children, but their home was always open to anyone in need. The villagers often remarked that Obiora's family was a reflection of God's love, a light that shone brightly even on the darkest days. Unity beyond the village. Under Obiora's successors, the village became a center for reconciliation and unity among neighboring communities. Once hostile villages, plagued by old feuds, were invited to gatherings where they could resolve their differences peacefully. One of the most memorable events was a festival of unity held every year. Villagers from miles around brought their traditions, music, and food to share. It became a celebration of diversity, faith, and the power of community. The legend of the village. As time passed, the story of the village became legendary. Pilgrims came from far and wide to see the Bible that had survived the former king's wrath. They marveled at its untouched pages and left inspired by the village's journey from darkness to light. The villagers, in turn, welcomed visitors with open arms, sharing their blessings and their story. It was a tale they never tired of telling, the story of a king who hated God, a people who endured, and a humble man who led them back to faith. On the 25th anniversary of Obiora's coronation, a grand celebration was held. The entire village came together, from elders to children, to honor the man who had changed their lives. Obiora, now grey-haired but still strong in spirit, stood before the crowd. "I am nothing without you and without God," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Our blessings are His blessings, and our future is bright because of our faith and unity." As the crowd erupted into cheers, a rainbow appeared in the sky, stretching over the village like a divine seal of approval. Obiora lived to see his grandchildren grow, each one carrying the values he had instilled in the village. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep, the villagers mourned him deeply, but their grief was mixed with gratitude. He was buried under the great baobab tree at the edge of the village, his grave marked with a simple inscription, "A servant of God and His people." The annual Thanksgiving Day became known as Obiora's Day, a time to remember his legacy and the blessings of faith. After Obiora's death, his legacy lived on. The village remained a beacon of hope, its story told far and wide as a testament to the power of faith and forgiveness. And though the former king's name was rarely spoken, his downfall served as a reminder of the dangers of pride and the enduring strength of humility. In the end, it was not just the village that was saved, but its soul restored by the grace of God and the leadership of a king who chose to serve rather than rule. The village continued to thrive, its people united by the values of humility, forgiveness, and love. The story of the former king and Obiora's reign was passed down through generations, not just as a cautionary tale but as a source of hope. And as the years turned into centuries, the village remained a shining light in the region, a testament to what could be achieved when people chose faith over fear, love over hatred, and unity over division. The villagers lived with the understanding that they were part of something greater, a covenant not just with God but with each other. And in that covenant, they found everlasting peace and happiness. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, like the video and comment on what you learned from the video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more enchanting tales just like this one. Thank you.